Well, good morning, everyone. Ness Hughes here with you and Mel Bell.
Morning, guys.
Good morning. Together with you for day 5 of our daily devotionals. We are still in the book of James. We're going to move on to chapter 4 today. And as I said yesterday, you should be really thinking in your mind a lot about the Sermon on the Mount. There's so much language in here that resembles what Jesus taught. I'm going to read just a couple of verses today rather than the whole chapter. The verses I've chosen hopefully give you a good vibe of the chapter. If you want to read it in full, you could just pause the video now and read it in full, and I'll summarize some of them. I'm going to read from verse 1, verse 4, and then 7 to 10. So let me read now. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? And then verse 4, you adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity against God? Therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. Verse 7, submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Come near to God and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and wail. Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. Well, isn't that, Mel, there's so much in there about this idea of double-minded, which we've heard many times through this book already. This idea of both trying to live in the world and the way of the world, and trying to live the way of God and his wisdom.
Totally. And it just seems to not let any room for that kind of one foot in each camp kind of life, doesn't it? And interesting that what he identifies as part of a symptom of that is the fighting and the quarreling.
Yeah.
And that kind of adulterous language. I'm reminded of books like Hosea, where it's a relationship that's being broken time and time again between us and God and between us and people, really.
Yeah, there's the unfaithfulness of people, and James is so practical in how he addresses that in this sort of quarrelling and bickering amongst church people. Well, yesterday, Mel, I listened to a podcast. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a podcast junkie, and I listened to a podcast yesterday featuring the story of a woman who's in that SBS show called Addicted, and she's a recovering alcoholic. And they got to the point of the discussion where they were talking about her recovery, and she was talking about different therapeutic approaches that she was having to try and undo some of her thinking habits. She'd become convinced that to function in the day, she had to drink alcohol. And she was talking about how she's applying some of these therapeutic strategies to try and refer more to her wise mind. She kept talking about needing to listen more to her wise mind, to do away with that old thinking. And what I really felt when I listened to that, immediately I thought, this is James. And what I really thought was that there was no way that she could dip in and out of both. It was destructive for her to venture into that old thinking that she needed to drink to be functional. And for her, she had to really acknowledge that there was only one way that was going to be the path to recovery. She couldn't dip in and out of both.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's true of our spiritual lives as well, that we can often find ourselves in behavioral patterns that keep bringing us back to an old self, that old life. The one that we should be able to leave in death, but sometimes we just keep revisiting in different ways time and time again. And I think James calls us to just pivot and fix our eyes upon Jesus, really.
Yeah, I think that submit yourselves then to God is really key here for James. I think it probably is the most instructive thing that he's saying to do, to fully submit your lives to God, to really wholeheartedly call him Lord and live as if he is Lord.
Yeah, and I love that idea of submission, because it just captures perfectly what we're talking about with wisdom and double-mindedness, that we find all of it as we come on our knees in submission to God, just offering everything. And I love that he's honest enough to think that part of that process is grieving and mourning and wailing, that it's not an easy process to hand over things to God. It's not an easy thing to let go of that control or those habits. And some of that washing of our hands requires quite real heartache.
Yeah. And I think later on in chapter 4, which we won't go into, it talks about this sort of temptation to be boastful. And I think there are some people like this lovely woman whose story I heard yesterday, where they're confronted with their lives and they need to find a solution to their life choices and their difficulty in life, their brokenness. And there are others, probably more like me and you, Mel, who at the moment sort of have the illusion that we actually can do it on our own. Life is pretty good. And so we can boast that we're doing it on our own. That's our temptation. And so it talks about also in chapter 4, God opposes the proud but shows favour to the humble. And I've often thought of that. Some people, life humbles them and God is near them, really near them. But there are many who can be fooled into thinking they can do it completely on their own. That's that sort of boastful pride.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about that in small group this year, of just how God might use circumstances to humble us, because that actually might be something that we deeply need. And he cares deeply for our comfort and our good, but he almost cares more, I think, for our holiness. And so sometimes there's moments where that need to be humbled is such a righteous, good thing, even when it's incredibly difficult.
I think so. And I think what's really stunning about all of this is chapter 10, which is where I landed us. Humble yourself before the Lord and he will lift you up. It's not that God is a God who, by his own sort of egomania, needs to be in control. And so there's this battle of these two egomaniacs, him and us, battling for who's in charge, and we just have to submit to a higher power. It's not like that. This is a loving God. Remember, that's been a flavour through James the whole time, that God is a faithful God, even when we are unfaithful. And that out of his love for us, his promise to us, that this is for our good. And God, as we go low, he actually lifts us up. And that's very much Sermon on the Mount, isn't it?
Yeah.
That those who mourn and grieve actually receive the kingdom of God.
Absolutely. And I love that verse 7 to 9 is kind of all the things that we can do as a part of our journey of sanctification and holiness. So he's calling us to submit ourselves, to resist the devil, and the reaction to that is the devil to flee, to come near to God, and the reaction is he comes near to us. And then he gives us these list of things that we are doing, that we can do ourselves, and this beautiful response of God, and he will lift you up. I love that. I love that idea that of being brought low before God in submission. And that it's not that we end up standing tall, it's that he lifts us back up.
Come near to God and he'll come near to you. Guys, whatever you're going through, whether or not you're in the throes of life and seemingly in control, but of course in every way you still need God, or whether or not life has brought you low, come near to God and he will come near to you, and be humble and he will lift you up. Bless you in your day today, and we will see you again tomorrow.
See you guys.
Bye.